The deafening crack of gunfire shattered the tranquility of Willow Creek's Main Street, sending Mary Zimmer ducking behind a water trough as chaos erupted around her. It was May 1876, and at 23 years old, she had seen her fair share of violence in frontier towns, but nothing prepared her for the scene unfolding before her eyes. A stagecoach robbery gone wrong had left 3 men dead in the dusty street, including the local sheriff, and, as she would soon discover, a couple who had been passing through town with their young daughter. Mary clutched her skirts and pressed herself against the weathered building, heart hammering in her chest as she peered around the corner. The bandits had fled, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Bodies lay still in the street as townsfolk cautiously emerged from hiding places. Among them, a small girl of about 6 years old knelt beside a woman's lifeless form, tugging desperately at her sleeve. "Mama, wake up," the child pleaded, her voice rising with panic. "Please wake up," the sight pierced Mary's heart. As the daughter of the town's most respected rancher, she had been raised with privilege, though her father had taught her responsibility and compassion above all else. Before she could think twice, Mary rushed across the street toward the child. "It's not safe here, little one," she said softly, crouching beside the girl. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins, falling around her face as she reached for the child's trembling hands. The girl looked up, face streaked with tears and dust. "They won't wake up," she whispered. Her simple calico dress was splattered with blood, though she appeared unharmed. Mary's throat tightened. "Come with me. We need to get you somewhere safe." She held out her hand, but the child shrank back, clinging to her mother's unmoving form. "I can't leave them," the girl sobbed. Behind them, the undertaker and his assistant were already approaching with grim determination. Mary knew she needed to get the child away before they began their work. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Mary asked gently. "Emma," came the small reply. "Emma, my name is Mary. I live at the big ranch outside of town. We need to let these men take care of your parents now." The girl's chin trembled as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Where will I go?" Mary's heart broke at the question. She had no answer. The child was clearly passing through town with her parents. There would be no local family to take her in. The orphanage in the next county was notorious for its harsh conditions. "Come with me for now," Mary offered. "We'll figure it out together." Emma looked from Mary to her parents and back again, desperation filling her eyes. Then, in a moment that would change both their lives forever, she grabbed Mary's hand. "Please," Emma begged, her voice cracking, "please pretend to be my mama, just for a little while. I don't want to be alone." The request stunned Mary into momentary silence. The raw need in the child's eyes tore at her soul. This wasn't a whim or a game, it was a desperate plea from a heart shattered by loss. "I'll take care of you," Mary promised, carefully avoiding a direct response to the impossible request. "You won't be alone." As Mary led Emma away from the terrible scene, a tall figure on horseback thundered into town. Quentin Tucker, son of the neighboring cattle rancher, had heard the gunshots from his position at the edge of his father's property. At 26, Quentin had established himself as one of the most capable horsemen and trackers in the territory, with a reputation for helping the sheriff when trouble arose. "Mary," he called out, dismounting with fluid grace despite his tall frame. His dark hair was windswept beneath his hat, his expression grave as he took in the scene. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Mary answered, unconsciously tightening her hold on Emma's hand. "But this child's parents." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Quentin's gaze had already found the bodies being covered by the undertaker. Quentin crouched down to Emma's level, his usual stern expression softening. "Hello there, little lady." Emma pressed closer to Mary's skirts, saying nothing. "Her name is Emma," Mary explained. "She was traveling with her parents on the stagecoach." Quentin nodded solemnly. "Those were Manning's boys who did this. I recognized their horses heading north." His jaw tightened. "Sheriff Parker is dead, his deputies organizing a posse." "Will you go with them?" Mary asked, already knowing the answer. Quentin had been trailing the Manning gang for months, ever since they'd rustled cattle from his father's ranch. "I have to," he replied, standing to his full height. "They've gone too far this time." Mary nodded, understanding his determination. The Tuckers and Zimmers had been neighbors for years, their ranches sharing a boundary line. Though their fathers had been engaged in a long-standing rivalry over water rights, Mary and Quentin had formed a cautious friendship that had deepened over the years, despite their parents' wishes. "I'm taking Emma to the ranch," Mary said. "She has nowhere else to go." Quentin's eyes met hers, concern evident in his gaze. "Your father will understand," Mary finished firmly. "I can't leave her to strangers." After a moment, Quentin nodded. "I'll ride out with the posse, but I'll come by when I return. She may remember something that could help us catch these men." As Quentin mounted his horse, Mary felt Emma tugging at her hand. "Is he going to catch the bad men?" "Yes," Mary answered, watching Quentin's retreating form as he joined the gathering posse at the end of the street. "Yes, he is." Mary's father, Harold Zimmer, was initially resistant to the idea of harboring the orphan child, but one look at Emma's tear-stained face crumbled his resolve. The Zimmer ranch was one of the largest in the territory, and Harold had raised Mary alone after his wife died of fever when Mary was just 12. He understood loss. "She can stay until we locate her kin," he conceded gruffly, though his eyes were kind as they rested on Emma. That night, as Mary tucked Emma into the bed in the spare room, the child clutched her hand with surprising strength. "Can I call you Mama, just when nobody else can hear?" Emma whispered, her eyes wide and pleading in the lamplight. "I'm scared I'll forget what it's like to have one." Mary's heart clenched. "Emma, please." The word hung between them, freighted with need. Mary stroked the child's hair. "When we're alone, if it helps you feel safe," she agreed softly, knowing she was crossing a line that might lead to greater pain later. "But we need to remember that I'm just taking care of you until we find your family." Emma nodded solemnly, but relief flooded her features. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered, testing the word. Sleep claimed the exhausted child quickly, but Mary sat beside the bed long after, watching the gentle rise and fall of Emma's chest, and wondering what the future held for this orphan child who had so suddenly entered her life. 4 days later, Quentin returned with the posse, grim-faced and dusty from the trail. The Manning gang had eluded them, disappearing into the labyrinthine canyons to the north where even Quentin's tracking skills couldn't follow. He found Mary in the kitchen garden of the Zimmer ranch, helping Emma water the rows of vegetables. The domestic scene struck him with unexpected force. Mary's slender form bent beside the child's, sunlight catching in her auburn hair, their laughter carrying on the afternoon breeze. "Mr. Tucker." Emma spotted him first, her initial shyness apparently overcome during his absence. Mary straightened, brushing dirt from her apron. "Quentin, you're back." "The trail went cold in Rattlesnake Canyon," he admitted, removing his hat as he approached. "But we'll find them." "The territorial marshal is sending men." Mary nodded, her expression clouding. "Did you learn anything about Emma's family?" Quentin hesitated, glancing at the child who was now distracted by a butterfly fluttering among the bean plants. He lowered his voice. The couple was James and Sarah Miller. They were headed to San Francisco. No other family that anyone knows of. Mary's heart sank. No grandparents, aunts or uncles? None that the stagecoach company had record of, Quentin confirmed. The marshal will make inquiries in San Francisco, but... The unspoken reality hung between them. Emma was truly alone in the world. "She's been asking for her parents less," Mary confided, keeping her voice low. "I'm worried she's forgetting them already. Or perhaps she's just adapting," Quentin suggested gently. "Children are resilient." Mary watched Emma, who was now carefully inspecting the butterfly that had landed on a nearby fence post. "She asks to call me Mama when we're alone," she admitted. "I told her she could, and now I'm afraid I've made a terrible mistake." Quentin's expression softened. "You gave comfort to a child who needed it. There's no mistake in that." Their conversation was interrupted by Emma's return, her small hand slipping naturally into Mary's. "Mr. Tucker, are you staying for supper? Mary's papa said I could help set the table if you were." Quentin smiled, a genuine warmth replacing his usual reserve. "Well, I wouldn't want to deny you the chance to help, Miss Emma. I'd be honored to stay for supper." That evening marked the beginning of Quentin's regular visits to the Zimmer ranch. Initially, he came with updates about the search for the Manning gang, but soon the pretense fell away. He came because he wanted to see Mary and Emma, to be part of the strange little family that was forming against all odds. By midsummer, Emma had fully settled into life at the ranch. She followed Mary everywhere, helping with chores, learning to ride a gentle pony Quentin had selected for her, and bringing unexpected joy to the Zimmer household. Harold, initially reluctant, had become completely smitten with his honorary granddaughter, teaching her to whittle and telling her stories of the early days on the frontier. One warm July evening, Mary sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Emma had fallen asleep early, exhausted from a day spent helping Harold with the chickens. The sound of hoofbeats drew Mary's attention to the road, where Quentin approached on his favorite bay gelding. His visits had become so frequent that she could recognize his silhouette from a distance. "Evening, Mary," he greeted, dismounting and securing his horse to the hitching post. "Hope I'm not calling too late." "Never," she replied with a smile, moving over on the porch swing to make room for him. "Emma's already asleep, though. She wore herself out collecting eggs with Papa." Quentin settled beside her, his tall frame causing the swing to dip slightly. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you alone." Something in his tone made Mary's heart quicken. "Oh," the marshal sent word, Quentin began, his voice careful. "They've located Emma's aunt in San Francisco." Her mother's sister. Mary felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. "I see," she managed, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "She's a widow, runs a millinery shop, no children of her own, she's willing to take Emma." Mary stared at her hands, twisted in her lap. "When?" "The marshal's deputy will be passing through next week. He could escort Emma to San Francisco." Quentin watched her closely. "Unless." "Unless what?" Mary looked up, hope flaring despite her best efforts to quell it. Quentin took a deep breath. "Unless you don't want her to go." "Of course I don't want her to go," Mary admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "I love her as if she were my own, but what right do I have to keep her from her real family?" "The right of love," Quentin said simply. "Mary, I've watched you with Emma these past months. You are her mother in all the ways that matter now. But legally, arrangements could be made." Quentin shifted on the swing, turning to face her fully. "Mary, I didn't come just to tell you about Emma's aunt. I came to ask you something I've been wanting to ask for years." Mary's breath caught as Quentin took her hands in his. "I've loved you since we were 17 and you beat me in the county horse race," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Our father's feud kept me from speaking up sooner, but I can't stay silent anymore. Marry me, Mary. Be my wife. Let's adopt Emma together and give her the family she deserves, the family we all deserve." For a moment, Mary couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the sudden fulfillment of a dream she'd scarcely allowed herself to acknowledge. "Our fathers," she began weakly, "can learn to get along or they can continue feuding on their own time," Quentin interrupted with a grin. "I'm not proposing to them," a laugh bubbled up through Mary's tears. "Yes," she said, the word emerging as a joyful whisper. "Yes, Quentin, I'll marry you." The kiss they shared on the porch swing was gentle and sweet, filled with the promise of all the years stretching before them. When they finally parted, Mary leaned her head against Quentin's shoulder. "What about Emma's aunt?" she asked, reality intruding on their moment of happiness. "We'll write to her," Quentin decided. "Explain the situation, invite her to visit. If she truly wants what's best for Emma, she'll see that the child has found a home here." The following morning, Mary sat Emma down for the most important conversation of their lives. The child listened solemnly as Mary explained about Quentin's proposal, their plans to marry, and their desire to adopt her officially. "So I would really be your daughter?" Emma asked, her eyes wide. Forever and always, Mary confirmed. "And Quentin would be your papa. And I could call you Mama for real, not just when we're alone." "Yes, sweetheart, for real." Emma was quiet for a long moment, her young face surprisingly thoughtful. "What about my first Mama and Papa? Would they be sad?" Mary's throat tightened with emotion. "I think they would be happy knowing you're loved and cared for. We'll always honor their memory, and you'll always know they loved you very much." Emma nodded slowly, then threw her arms around Mary's neck. "I want to be your real daughter," she declared, "and Mr. Tucker can be my papa." The wedding took place in late August, a simple ceremony in the Zimmer ranch yard. Harold Zimmer and George Tucker sat side by side in the front row, their decades-long feud set aside temporarily, at least for the sake of their children's happiness. Emma served as flower girl, scattering wildflower petals with solemn concentration as she preceded Mary down the makeshift aisle. During the vows, Quentin surprised everyone by including a promise to Emma, kneeling down to her level. "I promise to be the best father I can be," he said, his voice carrying clearly to all assembled. "To protect you, guide you, and love you as my own, all the days of my life." Emma, abandoning all protocol, flung herself into his arms. There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. After the ceremony, while the celebration was in full swing, a dusty carriage arrived at the ranch. A slender woman in a fashionable traveling suit descended, looking around uncertainly until her gaze fell on Emma, who was dancing with Harold. Mary's heart clenched as she recognized Emma's aunt from the description Quentin had provided. They had written to her, of course, but had received no reply. Now she had come in person, and Mary feared all their happiness might crumble. "Mrs. Tucker," the woman approached, extending her hand. "I'm Vivian Porter, Sarah Miller's sister." "Emma's aunt, Miss Porter," Mary acknowledged, anxiety making her voice stiff. "We weren't expecting you." "I received your letter," Vivian explained. "I wanted to see for myself." Her eyes drifted back to Emma, who was laughing as Harold twirled her around. "She looks happy." "She is," Quentin confirmed, joining them with a protective arm around Mary's waist. "We've come to love her as our own." Vivian nodded slowly. "I can see that. I almost didn't come, you know." "I've never met Emma. Sarah and we weren't close in recent years." "You're still her family," Mary said softly. "You have every right to know her." Vivian turned to them, her expression resolute. "I came prepared to take her back to San Francisco with me. I thought it was my duty to my sister. But seeing her here, seeing how she's flourished." She paused, swallowing hard. "I think Sarah would want her to stay where she's loved." Relief flooded through Mary. "You're welcome to visit anytime," she offered, "to be part of her life." "I'd like that," Vivian admitted. "But my life in San Francisco isn't suited for a child. My business keeps me working long hours, and I have no experience with children. Emma deserves the kind of home you've given her." Later that evening, after introducing Emma to her aunt and watching the tentative beginnings of a relationship form between them, Mary and Quentin finally had a moment alone. They stood on the edge of the festivities, watching as their unusual family celebrated around them. "Did you ever imagine our lives would take this turn?" Mary asked, leaning against her new husband's shoulder. Quentin gazed out at the scene, Emma now teaching Vivian a clapping game, Harold and George cautiously sharing a bottle of whiskey, neighbors and friends dancing to fiddle music in the lantern light. "Not in detail," he admitted with a smile. "But I always knew my life would be extraordinary if I could share it with you. Even with an instant family," Mary teased. "Especially with our family," Quentin corrected, pulling her close. "Emma may have come to us through tragedy, but love has transformed that tragedy into something beautiful." Mary looked up at him, her heart full. "The day she begged me to pretend to be her mama, I never imagined I'd actually become her mother for real." "Some pretending becomes truth when it's meant to be," Quentin said softly, before lowering his lips to hers. 5 years later, the Tucker Ranch, formerly the eastern section of the Zimmer property given as a wedding gift, was thriving. The house that Quentin had built with his own hands had expanded twice, once to add a proper kitchen, and again to add bedrooms for their growing family. Emma, now 11, had been joined by 3-year-old twins James and Sarah, named for Emma's birth parents, and infant Lillian. On the anniversary of the day Mary had first taken Emma's hand in Willow Creek's dusty street, they always held a special dinner. It was a time to remember the past and celebrate the family that had formed from tragedy and chance. This particular anniversary, Emma helped Mary prepare the meal, her capable hands mixing biscuit dough while Mary nursed baby Lillian. "Mama," Emma said thoughtfully, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been in town that day?" Mary considered the question carefully. "I think about it sometimes. I'm grateful every day that I was there when you needed someone." Emma nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. "I've been thinking about my first parents a lot lately. I can hardly remember their faces now." "That's why we have the photographs," Mary reminded her gently. Vivian had sent daguerreotypes of James and Sarah Miller that she'd found among her sister's possessions. They were displayed prominently in the family parlor. "I know," Emma acknowledged. "I just wonder what they would think of me now." "They would be incredibly proud," Mary assured her. "Just as proud as I am. Even though I'm not really yours." The question held no insecurity, just honest curiosity. Mary set Lillian in her cradle and crossed to Emma, wrapping flour-dusted arms around her growing daughter. "You became mine the moment you asked me to pretend to be your mama." Sometimes the family we choose is as real and important as the family we're born into. Emma returned the embrace fiercely. "I'm glad I chose you." "And I'm glad I chose you right back," Mary whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of her daughter's head. Outside, they could hear Quentin returning from the fields with the twins, their excited voices carrying through the open window as they described a rabbit they'd spotted near the creek. Mary smiled, listening to her husband's patient responses to their endless questions. Their life wasn't perfect. The Manning gang had eventually been captured, though not before Quentin took a bullet in his shoulder that still troubled him in cold weather. Harold and George's truce had evolved into a grudging friendship based primarily on their shared grandchildren. Vivian visited every Christmas, bringing fancy gifts and stories of city life that enthralled the children. But in all the ways that mattered most, their family had found its way to happiness. An orphaned girl's desperate plea on a tragic day had set in motion a chain of events that none of them could have predicted, creating bonds that would last a lifetime. As the family gathered around the table that evening, Emma raised her glass of cider in a toast she had created herself years earlier and repeated each anniversary. "To the day we became family," she said solemnly, "and to all the days since." "To family," they echoed, glasses clinking as the setting sun painted the room in golden light, illuminating a home built on chosen love, unexpected beginnings, and the courage to transform pretense into beautiful reality.